and public participation, public forum presentations. We don't have any today, but we have a significant number of deputations. There are deputations regarding item 27, Hagley Oval, proposed amendments to district plan. These have been scheduled for 2 p.m, and those making the deputations have been advised of that, so that we will be able to consider that paper in the afternoon, and that gives people a scheduled time to arrive. We have a deputation regarding item 20, Draft Productivity Commission submission, which we will hear first. We then deal with the deputations regarding item 26, South Shore, South New Brighton Earthquake Legacy Project. Now, obviously the deputations raise a number of issues, and we will want to take some time to consider those before considering the paper itself, so that's probably going to be this afternoon as well, but we're just working through the timetabling for that. And we've just had a very late request for a deputation on the item in relation to number, where are we? Number 35, funding and financing options for improving warmth and dryness of social housing. So we'll hear that one at the end of those deputations, as that request has only just come through. So we'll move on to the first deputation regarding item 27, Hagley Oval, proposed amendments to district. Deputation regarding item 20, Draft Productivity Commission submission. Could I invite Ross McFarlane of the Hallswell River Rating District Liaison Committee to come forward? Thank you. Good morning, Ross.
Good morning, all. Thank you for hearing our submission. Might sound a wee bit strange why a Drainage Commission is presenting on something as wide and varied as important as the finance and funding strategy. So I'll blast you through this as quickly as I can, because obviously you've got a huge one today. So, yeah, why are we here? Well, our focus relates to page 268 in your agenda today, clause 8. And that clause specifically relates to development contributions and how us as a council could collect them from neighbouring districts. So it's a bit of a touchy one. So just before I do the PowerPoint, I just ask you to bear that in mind and where we've come from. So I'll be about 2 minutes just covering this PowerPoint as to where we're at. So yeah, our drainage district goes from Hallswell or Hornby right down to Lake Ellesmere. It's a bit of a problem. It's been a problem for good on 100 years. And we have a great deal of difficulty trying to prevent that. That happens regularly. That's what we're trying to avoid, but of course nature beats us pretty much every time. That's when it gets a bit more serious, because it's threatening townships and not the floodplain of the previous slide. Our major defence mechanisms is that we've got to open the lake. We've got to open the lake to drain it. We've got all sorts of national water conservation orders, etc. But sometimes, given that there's a big swell, we just can't get that machinery in to do that. So, briefly, the drainage system covers 114 kilometres of drains, 42 kilometres of the Huratini River. Huratini in Maori means many turns slow, so that gives you a pretty good example of what happens downstream, and 22 controlled structures. The basis and objectives of us is to maintain a drainage system to provide for efficient and economic drainage of the Hallswell Drainage District, control lateral and bed erosion of drains, and maintain the cross sections for discharge. That's our network. Starts right up the top there, and we share a boundary for Selwyn, and then it comes out of the city into Selwyn and back into the city boundaries, surprisingly enough. We have a rating system that's based on the benefits, and in this funding and financing draft document, it often mentions the benefit principle. This is a classic case of the people who get the benefit pay an appropriate rate. Surprisingly, the blue areas pay the least rate. They suffer the most discharge off the hills, but they pay the least rate because it's the people on the flat that get the benefit of good drainage, and that's based on their geography and topology. So it's a bit of a weird one, but oops, wrong one. That's the classes of drainage. We have a huge matrix based on those colours as to what property pays which rate based on their land value only. That's really getting back to the city council areas, and that blue line is a rough demarcation line between where the water goes out the Heathcote catchment and gets 2 tides a day, and the water in the Hallsville catchment gets 2 tides a year when we happen to get that lake open, because it's not exposed to water. And this is where we sort of reflect back on the development contributions component of the funding and finance draft, if you like, submission. We've often asked for the ability to charge the city development contributions. And the reason for that is we think we could better spend those development contributions in our area rather than where they're collected for, or the city council area. And essentially you're asking that as part of that page 268 clause today. Gradually, or just to put it back in, indicative development contributions for each section in Hallsville, you take as DCs $4,726 plus GST. So when you add, 2,000 or 3,000 homes, that sort of stacks up a wee bit. So I'm not going to go any more on that. Sorry, gone too far. I'm just going to now touch on and read where we want to be. We come as a spin-off of the North Canterbury Catchment Board, and we drain the Hallsville and Eastern Selwyn areas. We collect rates via the City Council and via eClan. It's a very complex but still relevant mechanism for collecting charges. We also had to spend a significant amount of money to rehab the river post the September 2010 earthquake, and we've been paying those funds off over 10 years. Touched on why we've asked for development contributions, and we would spend it in different areas to improve that. Each time we ask for conditions of consent, we get answers back from our commissioners similar to this. In response to the liaison committee's request that development contributions are used to mitigate effects on land downstream of the catchment, we have no jurisdiction on or able to determine how these funds are spent. We encourage the committee, that's us, I'm speaking for the committee, to seek additional funding from both the applicant, in this case it was the City Council, or the Canterbury Regional Council, who do most of our management for us, through the annual plan process to facilitate this. So essentially they're telling us each time we ask for development contributions to actually know, go back and ask your existing ratepayers. The existing ratepayers shouldn't pay for development. That is what development contributions are there for. So in summary, just going back to the staff's draft, and I note that I haven't been able to see the Solgum or the local government in New Zealand submissions. So we appreciate the staff will have and will have had a better position to gauge the cross-boundary support, which is what this draft is asking. But I also sort of note here that we're actually asking our neighbours to contribute, and I can see the reason staff are asking for that, and it comes into that northern corridor and also stadia, etc. The scope and scale that we're referencing in roading and stadia in that document are way bigger than what we're asking for here. But I simply ask, should we be doing this to our neighbours? Is there a more cooperative mechanism to achieve the same outcomes? Because if you push towards charging our neighbours development contributions, we as a committee will be coming back to you and asking for development contributions in that area. We would only be one small committee that perhaps are going to do the same thing. So I think I'll sum up by saying you really need to ask the staff today, have they got the support of our neighbours to charge cross-boundary development contributions? I don't really want to be starting a bun fight with my neighbours. So that really sums it up. I don't know if I get opportunity for questions. I probably dribbled on long enough. But essentially, again, we need the money to fix the infrastructure, much like you need the money to fix the infrastructure. Where do we ask to take it across the boundary? And in this case, each time we do, the commissioners say no, go back to your respective authorities and ask for it. So yeah, and to final up, just really thank you for considering it. It's not an easy, or how would you say, system to understand, but it really is, in this case, it's a great example of the benefit principle where, the people who are paying the rate are getting the benefit, and that leads on to other areas of the draft strategy, and obviously leads into vacant land for tax purposes and also other development sort of issues. So I'll leave it there.
Have you guys made a submission to the Productivity Commission yourselves?
No, it's an option. Obviously,
I think you should.
as individuals or as a
no,
committee?
As a group. I actually think I want to encourage you to do so, and just highlighting the fact that we are, being live streamed. If we could just sort of highlight to people where they can go, and I'm just trying to find the relevant page. Here we go.
But it's really our issue summed up in section 6 of that productivity report. So it's only about 305 pages long. Yeah,
productivity.govt.nz, and there is a provision on there to make a submission. If you want to look at the Solgum report, it is online on Solgum, solgm.org.nz.
As I say, if the staff have looked at that, they'll have a valid reason for saying why we're asking for cross-boundary development.
But I really do think, and so you would like us to call out specifically the need to be able to have those cross-boundary flows, essentially, so that costs can gravitate to where the benefit lies.
I'll let you grab that from the staff, because I've read those other reports, probably, obviously, intently. And it just seems, as I say, I think there's better mechanisms to talk with your neighbours than arguing through legislation about, excuse me, your car's coming here and my cars are going there. And that's
we like to have that argument because we think we're being underfunded in that regard. But anyway, thank you very much, Ross.
Probably sum it up as you've got to be careful what you wish for, I suppose.
You do, but what you've highlighted is actually a very real issue, and we'll certainly take that into account when we come to that paper. But I do want to recommend to you that you actually put in your own submission so that it's tightly focused on that one issue. I think it would be very useful to the Productivity Commission.
Good luck on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move on to the deputations regarding item 26, and we'll start with the Coastal Burwood Community Board, Kim Money and Tim Sinters. Thank you.
Good morning, councillors. Leanne, staff and community. With me this morning I have Deputy Chair Tim Sinters. 9th of May, the resolution unanimously passed. 4.A stated, Estuary Edge current and pre-earthquake state and risk analysis to identify outstanding community needs. This will include specific actions and opportunities to mitigate inundation and erosion that addresses earthquake legacy repairs. This was very well received by the board and the community. While some residents appreciate the efforts thus far and some options have been provided, and we acknowledge the work and effort gone to this, however, has today's report delivered on the resolution? Not in our opinion. And we challenge the strategic alignment 9.1 and 9.2. Our community was depending on this to help alleviate some of their stress and anxiety, provide real certainty. From our conversations to date, it hasn't. North of the bridge, we can accept this option, but the investigation timeframes are too long and funding may or may not be available for any works, which equals no certainty. South of the bridge, only one option addresses the estuary edge repair, but it's not the recommended option. The report's preferred option allows erosion and flooding problems to come closer to the community's assets and places with further loss of land and trees. Only $750,000 for this, and the rest $1.85 million and $2.35 million need new funding. We refer to the estuary as environmental and cultural significance. The report 6.61 refers to the importance of the asset to the city, and 10.3 refers to it is of particular cultural, spiritual, historic and traditional associations of Ngāi Tahu. The question I have for you is, have government, Regenerate Christchurch and the council been responsible caring guardians preserving this land for the past 8 years? We don't believe so. Other than consultation, no visual signs to protect this land has been undertaken to date. South Brighton has 3,500 residents. 3% responded to this current report within 6 days. However, as elected representatives, our conversations over many years and many residents has indicated very clearly, as we have told you over many years, is reinstate and repair the earthquake-damaged edge, edge being the operative word. This report feedback is not representative because of the short time frame. South Shore, 500 houses, a third responded. The report recommended further investigations, so no solutions for the estuary edge repair, and all capital, or there's none, it has to be applied in the annual plan or long-term plan. Never-ending consultations and investigations. Can you imagine and appreciate how this is soul-destroying, especially when the South Shore residents took on themselves to fund the solution? They presented their OSAL options report to Regenerate and Christchurch, and still it has not been given the opportunity to be part of this report. Here's when you can make a difference. So out of respect for the South Shore residents and to give them surety that they have finally been heard and their proposal considered, we propose as part of the resolution recommendations today that out of the $300,000 operational expenses for South Shore investigations, that $50,000 be made available to commission an update of the independent South Shore OSAL options proposal to respond to the estuary edge earthquake repair, with an extension of the scope from South Shore Spit to south of the bridge, to run parallel with the Christchurch City Council investigations and presented early 2020. You can make this happen, so we ask that you support these additions today. Thank you, Tim.
On the 9th of May, we came to you with our concerns for South Shore and South Brighton Estuary Edge and the well-being of the residents and the families who reside there. Dr John Cook, a local doctor, talked to you about the people coming through his practice with mental health issues and quoted, "The earthquake ruptured our village and your decision corrodes our souls." He mentioned the lack of hope and how it affects people's mind. In my speech on that day, I mentioned that no other suburb has had to endure so much unrelenting stress and pressure in their daily lives. 9 years on, and we are still waiting for our destroyed, unsightly, dangerous estuary edge protection to be repaired, an earthquake memory that won't go away. I also mentioned the endless meetings and consulting we have had with never any results. On the 9th of May, a resolution was passed at Council that the earthquake legacy damage was going to be looked at. There was clapping in the gallery and on the streets. At last we'd been listened to. People in South Shore were excited. We had been listened to. Something at last is going to happen. Under a very tight time frame, meetings were organised, and I can sympathise how hard they must have been for staff and residents. Finally, after many meetings and drop-in centres, the options were presented. To the surprise of all, the focus seemed to be on the choice of 2 types of buns, and the community had to make a choice between the 2. The majority of the residents strongly disagreed with both these options. We have been told because of the preference of the community for the edge to be repaired, and that it is complex, challenging, complicated, and we've heard every word possible about that. To do this, we will form a new group called CAG, Community Advisory Group. I have been on so many of those in my last 12 years of council, you've got no idea. And we're going to discuss what's happened. That's what we thought the last 3 months was about, to discuss the estuary edge. So now we're coming up to more meetings, and we're going to go through the same thing over and over again. At the same time, as the meetings were going, the council had been doing protection work on parts of the estuary where, as you can see with the photos I just put around, there's been some work done to protect parts of the estuary edge where there's some council assets there. And one of them you'll see with a house there, you can see that it's just been protected because there's a council path being put there. If you go on the other page, you'll see where there's no protection, you'll see some residents there. They're not allowed to, well, at this stage, they would love to have something like you're seeing in the other pictures, but this is what they ended up with. Just recently, I received an email from a resident who had inquired about the huge rock pile near the South Brighton Bridge. He was told the rocks were going to be used to protect the damaged, eroded estuary edge around certain pumps of the old dump. It shows it can be done if there is a will to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on the concept of getting OSAL to do some further work. Would you see that as the council commissioning the update, or would you see that as something that would be resolved through the community board or the South Shore Residents Association?
Well, excuse me, the resourcing we're expecting is to come out of the 300,000 operations.
Oh, no, I get where the money's coming from, but,
okay.
but I'm probably asking a technical question about whether there's a benefit to resourcing the South Shore Residents Association to undertake that, because you're actually asking for an extension into South New Brighton,
correct,
which actually involves 2 residents associations, and I'm not sure whether that's a particular approach that would be helpful, whether it's done through the community board or whether you'd actually like us to make a decision to get an update of that report.
Well, I think that if we have that discussion, I think the main thing is to actually put that OSAL report on the table,
yep,
and the money allocated to it,
yep,
and how that's implemented. The community must be involved in that,
yep,
but the OSAL report is another option that can provide a plan that the community can go, yes, we like it, or no, we don't, or we can pick some of that or pick some of the other. But we must, with respect to the community, get it on the table.
But this is actually about getting OSAL to do some additional work. Yeah.
Just
Sarah, yeah?
Can I just quickly add something too? Very quickly, I know you've got questions. I just did mention before about that protection work that's been done. That's been done over the last month or 2. That's the same time the consulting's been going on. So this is a very used track. Residents see this all the time. And they think, oh, if only. Just want to pass you that on.
Sarah and Phil.
Thanks so much. And I can understand the concern that the current recommendations don't sort of address the OSAL recommendations. But it was very clear when you came to us earlier this year that you wanted the earthquake legacy stuff specifically addressed first. I mean, we went simultaneous with other adaptation work. And that's what this report deals with, whereas page 6 of the OSAL report makes it very clear that it's also an adaptation strategy and looks at the 100-year. So that's in the next phase of this work.
That's correct, and that's why we've had 2 meetings with staff, and I requested we have a meeting with councillors to discuss this report in depth about those things. But I've asked twice of staff if we could get the OSAL report updated so that it could be apples for apples and that it could be given the opportunity for the residents to just address the estuary edge as we were seeing, because that is a report, and that is where the community have put their confidence. So we could have got around that if we were given that opportunity, but we haven't to date. So that's why we're requesting it today.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I think that there was a view that it had been expected as part of the previous process that there would have been a report back on the specific recommendations of that report.
And we have to remember that the OSAL report was a pro bono. It was done
Yeah.
very quickly. It's now 3 years old, and
Yeah.
so we needed to be able to...
I don't think there's
give them
anyone
an
who's
update.
unsympathetic
Yeah.
to the concept of having good information.
We don't want it to be part of the next bit at this stage. We want to be able to update it so it can be part of this bit.
Good information always precedes good decision making. So thank you. Look, thank you very much. It's the time's expired, so really appreciate you coming here today and making your deputation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll be talking to you during the course of the day. Meg Rolston's unfortunately not able to join us today. So I think some points have been loaded on the hub that she would have made if she'd been able to come today. So it's a late apology, but there's been a bereavement. So we send our sympathies and will both acknowledge and receive her deputation by way of the points that have been lodged. South Shore Residents Association, Simon Brown and Linda Burdekin. Welcome and thank you for your deputation.
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning all. Many thanks for allowing the South Shore Residents Association to speak at a deputation today to express our opinions on the Earthquake Legacy Project as it greatly affects our residents' well-being and certainty for the future. Firstly, our thanks to the council staff for a great effort in a short time frame. I've seen Brandon today and Katie and others, so well done, to engage with the community and come up with the range of options that have been presented. We are heartened to have been part of this process and to have been heard by the City Council in this regard, albeit in a compressed time frame. Overall, we support the proposed option to further investigate erosion and flood protection options. However, our strong advice is that the investigation must lead to action and durable solutions for these important issues in the near future. Investigation is important and we need to get it right, but it must happen and turn into real action and solutions. We've waited almost a decade with no progress other than talking about it. Next, on to investigations and next steps. The Jacobs report supports what the community have been saying, that the previous estuary edge protection is in a very poor state. Whilst we appreciate that investigation needs to come before detailed design, we look forward to seeing the costings, the budget, commitment from the City Council and a programme to address the issues that were raised. Secondly, about consenting. We know numerous references to consenting as a potential obstacle through the report. Whilst consent will be necessary, we point out that the existing community cannot be punished for the fact that previous structures were not consented. That is not our issue. We also point out that there is something fundamentally wrong if the consent process avoids and blocks improving community well-being and safety. We strongly urge the City Council to use consenting as a facilitator of action, not as a means to block well-meaning and deserving activity. We note that in many areas, existing drainage exists in the red zone, and this will need to be factored in and removed as part of the bund installation, otherwise this could, or probably likely will, become a path for floodwater, perhaps underneath the bund. We know of a privately owned section on the red zone edge where this has already been an issue. The Regeneration Act. And we urge the City Council to continue to use the Regeneration Act for earthquake recovery as it was intended. There are some concerning references to consenting blocking the recovery process and the response, which could be overcome if the Regeneration Act was used in the way that it was intended. Multi-layered ownership. ECAN, LINS, the government, the City Council, who owns what land and who's responsible. That issue is surely complex bureaucratically, but from a community point of view, this is nothing more than infighting between organisations that are funded by our rates and taxes. If local and national government need to collaborate to succeed, then that is precisely what the community need and deserve. We will not accept any more buck passing between organisations. That simply has to stop. We recognise the activity at Bridge Street with the new engineered bund going in, noting this area has more issues with groundwater than South Shore does. We believe the community will accept this type of bund in the Lynn's bund location, in addition to erosion protection measures, by replacing the previously existing erosion protection structures that existed pre-earthquake. I know that there's some challenges with some of those were built in the estuary and some were on boundaries and some weren't. I think perhaps a simple solution to that is to rebuild such structures on the edge of the boundaries so that you're not dealing with building things in the estuary, which is obviously going to be a challenge. You could just build it on the land boundary where it's supposed to be. We also point out that it's very difficult to make an informed decision on it was very difficult to make an informed decision on the information presented. Hence, I suppose, why the council staff have opted to present the investigation proposal that they have. We note that the responses to the questions from residents in the recent survey can readily lead to the same answer when you read the comments, regardless of whether they ticked agree or disagree to either of the options from the people that we spoke to. Whilst agree or disagree seem quite equal in the analysis, we think this data is somewhat misleading and it appears divisive as to what people want when we are in fact unified. Whilst we appreciate that the OCL report and the CCRU reports are amongst a range of presented options that the City Council have considered, these remain an important point of reference for the community as to what success looks like in the future. We agree with item 1.17. It suggests an RL 11.4 engineered bund in the same location as the current temporary Lynn's bund. We also appreciate that further investigation is needed into erosion solutions before the bund location decision should be made. Next, we strongly disagree with the suggestion that earthquake legacy issues should be put forward to a citywide community reference group. That is totally inappropriate and unfair in our community. We strongly disagree with item 1.20 in this regard. A citywide conversation is needed for long-term planning for adaptation and to climate change, and we are keen to be part of that conversation. However, not before our earthquake legacy issues have been resolved. We'd like more time with council experts to be able to fully understand the options and to, from this, make an informed recommendation to the community on what we think would be best and to hear their views. Overall, the Residents' Association greatly appreciate that you've listened to the concerns and support we have raised through the Earthquake Legacy Project and for giving our residents an opportunity to voice their concerns, albeit in a very compressed time frame. We look forward to erosion and flood protection measures being constructed in South Shore to answer our earthquake legacy issues in preparation for the adaptation conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and much appreciated. Linda, did you want to add to that?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? No, Glenn, Yanni?
Thank you, Simon and Linda. I guess it's hearing you and reading your email, which you've just spoken to. One of the many key aspects I'm picking up is specificity. So I'm sensing that you'll actually see, or action for you looks like costings, budget, etc. And you've put in commitment, and it strikes me that those two are the commitment to it.
I think the response that came out was quite loosely worded, like as though there was going to be some investigation done, and it may not lead to anything. It didn't really feel like a commitment to solve the issue, actually. What we're looking for is for the council to committing to resolving this issue, and just to say this is an issue, the community are affected, let's fix it. And that's what we thought we heard at that last hearing. I think it was in May. But that's why we were celebrating, because it sounded like commitment. It doesn't feel quite so like commitment now. Okay?
Yep. Yanni?
Yeah, thank you for your deputation. You talk about supporting some of the things that are going forward, but you also talk about the need for more time, and we've just been criticised for, acting too slowly. So can you just tell me, in terms of being really clear about what you're seeking today, do you want us to lie the report on the table and have more conversations with the community over the recommendations? Is that basically what you're asking for?
I mean, I think as I said at the start, the council staff did well in a time frame. I mean, it's been a long time in terms of 10 years, but the recent piece of work is action, and I'm quite pleased to have had the opportunity to talk with staff, and we've put the community needs on the table. I think everybody said that estuary edge protection and flood protection was mostly the highest concern. There were some sort of mixed reactions. The three options that came out didn't feel like they answered all of that. You know, with two bund options and what have you. So I'm not really answering your question, am I? I think we just need a commitment to solve the issue. If it takes another 6 months to get the right answer, I think that's probably okay. We just need a commitment that this is going to be fixed. So people can sort of start moving on, it's going to happen, council are behind this, and they want to do what's the right thing for the community. I think people would feel a lot better with that if that was what was presented, even if it took a bit longer. But it does need, yeah. I mean, climate change is a long-term issue. You saw from the Jacobs report, there's 14 metres of erosion here and there, through holes in broken walls and broken Reno mattresses that have been abandoned. All that stuff needs sorting out because it's literally eating away at our suburb. You know, it needs sorting out. And whilst these are natural issues, the problem is actually man-made. Yeah, because things that were removed have not been put back for a decade.
Can I just cut in this?
Sure.
I think that it's summed up in that we will wait 6 months for investigation. We understand the need for that, and in the scheme of things, 6 months or so investigation is certainly not a bad thing and is acceptable. But what we also need is the emphasis to change from investigate to actually doing something, and that to be very clearly stated. At the moment, the way everything is worded, we'll investigate, but subject to consent and the difficulties we perceive with this, which makes it very wishy-washy. We just want some clarity that there will be action.
Sarah?
Thanks so much for that. And I mean, you referred to the earlier meeting and how it was promising and we promised action and stuff. That resolution still stands. And so we do want to get this resolved, but we also reacted and gave a tight time frame for the initial report back so that we could do it now and get some stuff underway. Just acknowledging that and that there will be more work. Yeah.
Do acknowledge that.
But when it comes to consenting and promising and those kind of things, so we're not, as elected members, in charge of consenting. And so what happens then if we say we're going to do this and don't say subject to consenting, and then we say we're going to do it and it comes back to say that we can't because we can't get a consent?
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Well, no, because we don't have that ability sometimes. And so I'm really wary of over-promising and under-delivering. Does that make sense? Because that's also been a concern in the past. Yeah. Yep. We can't control ECAN, for example, in their consenting processes or that kind of stuff. So, yeah. Thanks.
And you'd be keen to see this OSAL report updated since it's been 3 years?
Yeah, that would be a good step.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much for your submission.
Deputation,
sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Christchurch Coastal Residents United, Warwick Schaefer. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for your deputation.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting us in to make this deputation. I think mine should be fairly short and I cover some of the things, but we have a slightly different slant on this. So the first thing I would like to say is that staff did well to get the proposals to the state they got in the time frame they had. You've been hearing about frustration over 10 years of nothing happening, and that's absolutely genuine, and people are in quite a state in this area. That's been said over and over, but this last resolution was reasonably recent, and to get it to the point in the time and with such a big organisation, I think they've done well. In fact, compacting it like that has, I feel, really pushed things forward. But more information is needed, and I think staff can see that themselves. The options presented very crudely were what I call a patch-up option to the existing Lindsbund on the edge. A few holes filled in. I can imagine trucks backing up and dropping a bit of gravel here and there. That's versus an engineered setback option. So CCRU are supportive of the proposal for further investigation because it's required to make an informed decision about what is actually best. And so really the options presented were light on detail and lacked an erosion prevention strategy, which I think is the absolutely critical thing about this at this stage, and the need for more information. So without an erosion protection strategy, it's very hard to tell which option is actually better, or even if the best option has been presented yet. So again, this is no slight on the efforts of council staff. The time frame was very tight and it was a good start. I think it's got the ball rolling, so to speak. I think the key thing in terms of our presentation is the idea of collaboration. CCRU want a collaborative approach to developing a solution. This is possibly slightly new, but hopefully not too far outside the scope of your thinking. The key thing for us is that collaboration needs to be at a technical level, and community needs funding to be able to contribute experts. We've always found informally, when we can talk to council experts, the planners, the engineers, you really get a good understanding of the council viewpoint, and they probably get a good understanding of us, and that collaboration has always been very productive from our perspective. So we would like the idea of thinking about how to formalise that a little bit more. Perhaps you already have reference groups and so forth that usually involve community members, great, but think about the idea of a group that was, well, those reference groups those members were experts in the field, so they could really bring something to the table. So then you have engineers talking to engineers, they can talk their own language. We think this idea will produce better solutions and outcomes that are more likely to satisfy all stakeholders. And I think would engender a sense of trust in the process from the community perspective. They've got people, experts in the field, able to talk to your experts to come up with a solution that we're all happy with. The other point I have under this is, I think it's been mentioned already, at this stage it's earthquake repairs. It is a local issue and should involve local stakeholders only. It's not something that should involve citywide consultation, and this is mentioned in the report, so I won't labour on that. Another point for me is the process should be transparent and public. So when we're working out a solution, it should be an open process so that community and community experts working on solutions can report back to their community as things go. So if that's the rules from day one, everybody understands it. I've often seen you have reference groups that are Chatham House behind closed doors, and they get very compromised because they are representing the community, talking about things, but they're not quite sure what they can tell the community back again. It's a very difficult situation, so I'd like to avoid that and think about the idea of complete transparency, like we are sitting here today being videoed. We know that. I think it's healthy. The more of that, the better, in my opinion. Chatham House behind closed doors should be a last resort. Again, I won't labour this because it's been said, there needs to be a clear commitment to implement the solution once developed, and the timeframe needs to be set, and we're suggesting early 2020 as a start. This is something a little bit specific to CCRU. This is about earthquake repairs, but it should be done, but what's done shouldn't compromise future ability to adapt. And there should be wriggle room for sensible future proofing. I'll just make that point. Finally, I hope that this represents a further turning of the corner. This suburb in particular has had a really torrid time. I don't know if any of you have had to fight against insurance companies. but it's tough and demoralising and depressing. Being on the end of effectively what have been managed retreat policies is similar, extremely demoralising. And people have dealt with that and they've seen nothing happening for 8 years, and they draw the conclusion that you're doomed and we're walking away. So I'm hoping we've turned a corner, and the first sign of it was the fixing of the RUO, the residential unit overlay. That was a great effort by council, everybody on board. It was a great achievement, and I'm hoping that this will be another step along that road, and we'll go on to do more great things when it comes to an adaptive response. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for a very considered deputation. It's much appreciated, and for acknowledging a process that as long as we put all the facts on the table and think to the future at the same time that we're making decisions for today, then we end up with a much better result. So I really appreciate that. The OSAL report, CCRU would be supportive of getting an update to that.
Look, I think it's a great idea. There's work being done already. To add to that, to put into the options mix, I think can only be a good thing.
Great, Sarah.
And following from that, your plea for us to have our staff working with the experts in the field that come from the community, rather than just getting a straight, update from OSAL. Having the people from OSAL working with our staff so that there's shared understandings as that's happening would probably be more useful.
Yeah, I think it's a discussion to have, isn't it? Where, obviously, for us to
because you want to trust the OSAL and the independents, but also need that that shared understanding of all the information and stuff, so that both groups are coming together.
Yeah. So what you're asking, just so I'm correct here, is should OSAL go forward and do a report independent, completely standalone, or should OSAL work with council experts to produce a joint solution? Is that essentially what you're asking?
Potentially, yeah. Or because that way you get that joined up thinking.
Yeah, look, I think this is a discussion to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there are pros and cons for both approaches, but I think a solution here is actually a little bit more than engineering. There's planning, there's legal. So in terms of solving this, it's not just engineers. So we're going to have to get RMA lawyers, we're going to have to get planners and engineers. So it's a bit broader than just engineering. So from that perspective, I think the key thing here is funding. Like, community needs some resources about to contract those experts to sit at the table with and represent us, and to work with your experts.
I think the whole district plan process demonstrated the need for communities to be able to pull in those resources to help them deal with complex environments. And the coastal environment is a complex environment, and it does involve ECAN and a coastal policy statement. So there's a layer of documents that have a higher order depending on where they're sitting. And our district plan sits at the bottom of that ranking. So, there are issues that we need to work with really carefully. So, I really appreciate what you're saying. But the other thing that sort of kind of this paper made me realise was just the extent of the complexities. I guess one question that I've been asking over and over and over again is there anything that could be done with a regeneration plan that would enable something that couldn't be done without one? And as I've been told, no, that we can do whatever needs to be done in that environment without a regeneration plan or an amendment to our district plan. But I think that the paper has raised some questions about whether the consenting requirements that don't sit within the organisation and don't sit within the parameters of the Regeneration Act might be create a layer of complexity that I didn't realise was there. But I think to get an update that brings in all of those issues, the legal complexities and all of those other things, I'd really like to put I don't want to put such a tight time frame on it that people can't deliver, but I really would like to put sort of an earlier reporting or even an updating obligation into the recommendations so that we can monitor progress rather than wait till next year.
We're suggesting quarterly updates,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thank you very much, Warwick. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. The South Brighton Residents Association, Seamus O'Crumpha.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor, Councillors. I'll come to item 26 at the end of this, but just to look at the back history, because we've had a decade of inaction, basically from the Council from 2010, when the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement came in, which obliges territorial authorities and district councils to to identify and mitigate coastal hazards. So there was an excuse not to do anything after the earthquakes, perhaps, but in 2015, we had this brochure, which was published and distributed to residents' associations, identifying the coastal erosion and inundation zones, Zone 1 and Zone 2, over a period of 50 and 100 years. Nothing more was heard of that, really. Then we had Regenerate Christchurch came in 2016. We had 2 years of passing the buck here and there, pseudo-community engagement, discussions, consultation, and absolutely no progress in terms of the item 26 issues. We had from Council an earthquake legacy report was supposed to be brought in by the 31st of August in 2017. Then the Council group responsible was disbanded. One of them turned up on the How team, which was the next stage. In 2018, South Brighton Residents Association voted no confidence in Regenerate Christchurch because we had had 10 or 15 meetings with them with absolutely no productive outcome from it. Then we had the How team, which involved members of the community but was strictly controlled by Council and ECAN. Again, it produced absolutely nothing. And now we have the Coastal Futures team, which has spent the last 3.5 months on, for me, a futile exercise in engagement with the community when a lot of the information was already with Council, and residents may not know this, but the Council has had reports such as this one, which is 188 pages in length from GHD, which was delivered in December. Many of you will know about this from subcommittee work, but this has not been communicated to people. This has detailed plan designs for all stop bank management from the entire lower estuary. It has costings, it has risk analysis, and the information on this makes what the Coastal Futures team has done over the last 3.5 months absolutely useless. It's like bringing in a community nurse to perform triple bypass surgery. These are the experts. You don't bring administrators and advisors to tell you what you need to do to construct a stop bank, what you need in hydrology to protect against rising groundwater, all of these other things. So this is also the third thing, the third report. There was one in September 2016, 188 pages long. There was a plan in December 2018, and then this one, the detailed design plan. If we move on to slide 2. This is another problem which connects with stop banks, bunds, etc., etc. This is a recently published New Zealand map for all earthquake risks. Insurance Council of New Zealand published details of this during the week. So they will be using this to up insurance premiums. You can see all of the estuary side of the Brighton Peninsula has a very, very high propensity to liquefaction. So this increases the risks for putting in infrastructure in the form of bunds or stop banks, and it also will affect all insurance premiums, which is a huge problem in our area because of earthquake issues that haven't been dealt with. Moving on to number 3. Slide 3 shows Kibblewhite Street in 2007. As you can see, there are no stop banks. The path along the roadside, which I walked many, many times with my dog, is roughly on the same level as the street. So what was put in there under emergency legislation was basically a pile of compacted gravel and soil. There was no investigation of the substrata underneath, and groundwater is an issue which hasn't been dealt with. The Coastal Futures Group was supposed to look at inundation, erosion, rising groundwater and loss of land elevation, but that has, in the proposals that they've brought, that has been compacted into bunds and reinvestigation of the stop bank and the societal risk. They're also telling me that the reinvestigation of the risk to life from failure of the stop bank, which we can see on the next slide, will be using the ANCOLD standard, which is the Australian National Committee on Large Dams. As we pointed out in the past, this is designed for dams between 5 and 10 metres in height. So if we can have the next slide, you can see roughly what the difference is between the road and the stop bank. Is it stuck?
We've got it on there, right?
Okay, yeah. Well, you can see there, first of all, you can see the cracking, which occurred after the February 2011 earthquake, and the fact that the pathway has slid towards the river. That's the effect of the liquefaction. So, because it hasn't been designed, there's no design for earthquake loading. Anything you put on top of that is likely to just slide towards the river if there's another earthquake. So that won't help us either. Thanks, that's good. Mm-hmm. This, I should point out, the title is Stop Bank, but it's not a stop bank because it doesn't stop. Even after this was raised and compacted and expanded, water was seeping in underneath it and going all the way across the road into the neighbouring garden at the end of the street. So the one after that. This is from the aforementioned GHD. So this shows that council had plans to repair or replace stop banks all the way down the river on both sides from Evans Avenue all the way down to the end of, well, we only see here down to the end of our suburb, but that it continues down to South Shore. This is another point to make. The priority area should have been north of Bridge Street because this was the area that was moved from the regional environment, into the coastal environment when the river mouth was changed from Bridge Street to Evans Avenue. That was in 2015, end of 2015, start of 2016. So all of these things come back to the question of transparency, which was raised by the previous speaker. So from what I've shown you, there doesn't seem to be a lot of transparency. We've had amateurs trying to present professional solutions when the professionals had already analysed and given answers in detail 3 years ago and updated it as recently as last December. So previous speakers have said we need to have action. Here's the action. This also includes resource consents from Environment Canterbury and the conditions that the resource consent will be given under. Why are the community not being told what the conditions are and what the problems are? Because in the subcommittees and the Strategic Capability Committee, you must know what has been discussed on this and what Environment Canterbury has said is needed. Is it possible? Tell us. Is it not possible? What are the alternatives? You have to decide. A lot of this comes from the fact that EQC walked away from the land damage, and this was not addressed in the cost-sharing agreement, which was recently wrapped up. So this is the huge question. Where is the money going to come from? Is it feasible? Or are you going to let people live in unsanitary conditions, lose the equity in their houses, and turn the entire Brighton Peninsula into a giant slum? Which means thank you very much. ladies and gentlemen, that's it. And to finish with some Maori, which I always like to, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Ka kite anō.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for your submission.
I do my
Any
best.
quick questions? We've got just a few seconds to go.
Deputation, yeah.
Look, thank you very much, Seamus, for presenting to us. It's been in-depth as usual and much appreciated.
Thank you for hearing us.
Thank you.
I hope you'll listen to us as well.
Thank you. The South Brighton Tennis Club, Reuben McNabb and Mark Condon.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I won't further. You've heard a lot of discussion this morning from a lot of people. We're representing the tennis club, and I'm also an individual, as Reuben is, in the area. So I've lived on the estuary for near on 60 years, both sides, very versed in the goings-on. One thing and one thing only, Reuben and I have spent many a wet winter Saturday sweeping out the tennis club from yet another flood. One thing we would like is a hard edge on the estuary or an engineered bund. I spent 2 hours yesterday reading Jacob's report, went through everything, very versed in the whole thing. I don't see anything less than that as being sustainable. If the council doesn't accept a hard edge, why is it hard edged from the Heathcote Bridge through to Sumner? I know that's the main channel. We're still in the basin for the Avon Heathcote rivers. I personally had 2 houses on the estuary front where we'd all had our own walls against the sea. That's all been gone and still laying in rack and ruin. We don't see, as both the tennis club and both as an individual resident, any less than a hard edge or hard engineered bund along the front. We're losing substantial ground. In fact, Derek in his Jacob's report, I think very conservatively said that if nothing's done in the next 50 years, at least 15 metres of ground will be lost. I would think it'd be further than that in my estimate, but he was paid to come up with a report. We have to accept it, I guess. I'd just like Reuben, for those of you who don't know, Reuben's been the powerhouse of the South Brighton Tennis Club. He's got our juniors up to at least national levels from a very small club. Most of our junior teams play off in the finals in Canterbury. He's done an outstanding job in the community and for our club. Our club was heavily devastated by the earthquakes. We've had 3 courts re-established at a cost of over $90,000, which the club fundraised itself. We've got 2 courts to go, which we're now endeavouring to help. And Reuben's been 100% behind the club and with the youth in our area all the way. All we want is an opportunity to be able to carry on. Would you like to say anything, Reuben?
Yep. First of all, thanks for the community involvement sections around the meetings that we had at Beatty Street and other parts of Brighton, South Brighton, and also the application or submission process as well. I think that was an important step to get some sort of community engagement. Just a couple of things about that. The deadline for it was 3 days. Now, there's working fast and there's working to get pressure put on people to work. 3 days insufficient. Some of us rang up and complained. We got another couple of days extension on it. Now, if it's true that the council only received 110 submissions back from South Shore, South Brighton, on this most recent proposal, that's a piss poor number coming back on such an important issue. But again, it goes back to the fact that maybe 3 to 5 days isn't really community involvement. Okay, so yes, thoroughly encouraged that there was community participation. That outline could have been better. Secondly, specific to that submission or application process, there were 3 options specific, and I'll just talk about south of Bridge Street, okay? There were 3 submissions or 3 options to have a look at. Now, 2 of those options included bunds being built 25 to 100 metres back from what we call the current estuary edge, yet there was no mapping of that for people to actually see what that actually looks like. Now, in this week's paper, we have the 25 to 100 metre option talked about, and one of the things that it says is this is going to protect the tennis club. Well, if you go from the edge of the estuary and walk back 100 metres, you're probably inside the tennis club. And that ground disappears on every sou'wester. I'm unaware of any other part of the city that has had to put up with this visible, markable, noticeable issue. Surely it must be painfully aware now that people are going to either reject paying rates, or the value of their property or their businesses or their community association is going to be impacted by the lack of security in the area. Okay, and I understand that there's been a negotiated agreement between the council and the government around the earthquake legacy, or what the split of how that role is going to look. I'd argue that you guys have got a pretty short straw on that one as well. However, we were not red zoned. Part of us were, part of us weren't. We have a human right to have...
Excuse me. Sorry, it's just a reaction to the phrase, we were not red zoned. I was.
Specific, 200 houses along the estuary edge, etc.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but we're still there, okay? That's not going to change. Government's not going to change that. They're not going to come back and change that now. No. So this is the consequence of decisions that have been made. We have to manage the best of the situation. We have a school, we have a surf club, we have a play centre, tennis club, football facilities. What's happening with the yacht club? Has not $2.5 million just been spent on the estuary edge to get a yacht club going? Are we whacking the bun back 100 metres? Where's the yacht club? 15 metres from the estuary edge. Does that make sense? No. So, clearer proposals on those things. It was great that we got the options, but nobody could see the map saying where all the outlay of that work was. I'd also say that the temporary option, or sorry, the setback option, is not a continuous line either. And most people would probably agree that water will go to the lowest point. So if you've got holes in your wall or holes in your dike, there's probably a consequence for that. Righto, thanks for your time, team. Mark, have you got anything else to add?
No, I'd like to thank everybody for giving us this opportunity. As you'll all appreciate, I'm sure the previous speakers have cited, it's been a 10-year battle, but we'll be here for the rest of it as much as we can, and we'll be doing the best for our area. 2 words, hard edge. Don't forget it, please.
Thank you very much. No, you don't.
No, question.
No, you are not getting off the hook that lightly.
Right, bring it on.
Can I just say though that I know the South Brighton Tennis Club very well. I've been there to.
You have indeed
present awards on occasions.
Yes.
But can I just put what your submission is in a different way, which is you are asking us to take into account the need to protect a significant community investment in a community asset.
Yes, that would be a fair comment.
Because I don't think that we've taken that into account so far, is that the community itself has made an investment in this asset, and that's what needs to be at the front of our mind when we make that decision.
Well, I think it's categorically part of what it is. And I feel the same way about this. I'm not a member of the surf club, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's a community asset, that tennis club, or that holiday park, or those football fields.
Yeah. Okay, Tim and Sarah.
Yeah, no, thank you. I've taken my short people to tournaments at your tennis club, and it's always been welcoming and a great competition. So I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing under difficult circumstances for your young people in your community. I think it's a lot harder than people think, and I really commend you guys for sticking in there, so thank you.
Just to follow up on that, on our way to this meeting, Ruben and I established another net at the Linwood Ave Tennis Club, and we're going back after this meeting to put another one up, purely for the community, until the lovely new venture that the council's building there is finished. So still work for the area, still work for young.
And Rafiti on the way too, councillors, isn't it?
Excellent. Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you, and I have seen photos of the tennis club being swept out after floods up on a friend's Facebook page, and it's really disheartening when it happens again and again. A question over the hard edge stuff. So the hard edge that has been there hasn't been any higher than the actual land itself. It's just been really low and doesn't actually afford any flood protection. And yet you were saying hard edge was really important. From your submission, though, I tended to think that the bund, that's the flood protection, that's a little bit of height, would have been more important.
If a bund's engineered,
yeah,
it's a completely different thing. If you build just a bund,
yeah,
it's generally built out of soil or loose material, which has no stabilising effect.
It needs something that has some time, some longevity in it. Yeah.
In a bund.
Yeah.
And in your view, in what way do you think that would hold back the erosion?
No, I'm just there's two different things. So a hard edge might help protect against erosion, but it's the bund that protects against the flooding. Or is what you're asking for, like a bund, right? A hard engineered bund, like a height on the edge?
It can be an engineered bund or a hard edge.
But did you want the bund at the edge?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, would you like to lose a percentage of your property where you live, or the whereabouts of the park where you recreate? Would you feel happy about seeing that eroded away on a regular basis?
I mean, question back the wrong way, but 15 metres over 50 years, when we know that our adaptation work is yet to come, and the request from the community and the community board was simply for the earthquake legacy stuff, not the adaptation. Do you get it what I mean? Like, there's two different bits of work that we're going on separately. So, yeah. But there's ways to stop erosion without a hard edge.
Yep.
I disagree.
Yep. Well, the time. I'll let you ask one question, David. Sorry.
With respect to repairing the edge, I've sort of proposed an argument lately that if we built a Reno mattress and gave a wall along there to RL 11.4, there may be a need not to have a bund. And I think the previous speaker said that some of our previous protection work was only at ground level. And there's a huge cost in actually repairing engineered bunds. So to actually just repair the edge with Reno mattresses and gabions to a level that is going to afford flooding and erosion protection, is that something you would recommend or support? Or would you prefer to see an engineered bund in there somewhere as well?
Primarily, we want to stop flooding and erosion. That can be achieved in many ways, but from my experience, and I've travelled extensively throughout the world, I've never seen a soft edge ever hold back an ocean. And the bund, the last extensions to the bund down South Shore were done, I think, on a wet Saturday evening about 1 or 2 o'clock in the evening. as an emergency work for the sea pushing through on the crossroads, because there was no bund there. As Ruben said, water finds the lowest level. I can't foresee any other circumstance than a hard edge or an engineered bund along the existing front of the estuary to stop erosion, and it can be designed and built hopefully in a way, I mean, none of us can foresee the future successfully. We're working on the next few decades, maybe, short term, medium term. Past that, who knows? We might all, I mean, the existing bund is cited as being 4 metres above the datum point, or 4 metres below the datum point in the cathedral. And if you look at the Avon River outside the Bridge of Remembrance, at least be 2 metres below the cathedral. So you're looking at a margin of, say, 2 metres from inner Christchurch down there. Well, that represents flooding for the whole of the flat of Christchurch back to the estuary or the sea. So who knows in the future, but we're looking at something interim that's sustainable for at least 1 to 2 decades. Past that, I think you'd have to look again.
Thank you both very much. Love your passion and love your commitment, so thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, and the last deputation that we have today is the one that I mentioned earlier, which is on item 35. Stephen McPake speaking about the funding and financing options for improving warmth and dryness of social housing. Welcome.
Good morning, councillors. My name's Stephen and I reside in Haas Courts, which is run by Otatahi and, of course, the City Council. I moved into the units back in 2016 due to unforeseen circumstances in my life. During this time in my units, I have lost 2 beds, linen, clothing, and I've also been unwell 2 to 3 times every year. I've also lost income because of this. My son, this year alone, has been sick 3 weeks and has been unable to go to school. I come to you today to see an improvement in social housing. In the 2017 Council Housing Accord, which ended on the 31st of December, states under Section 22, the Government and Council City agree to improve the supply and quality of social and affordable housing. It also states under Section 32, the Accord identifies the intention of the Government and Council to work together to address the issues affecting social housing and affordable housing in Christchurch. In the long-term plan, dated 2018 to 2028, it is mentioned that adequate housing is a basic requirement. People must have access to housing, adequate housing. The document continues to say good quality housing is required for healthy communities, which some tenants haven't seen. Recently, on Stuff and other media, there has been 8 articles starting from the 24th of April last year about cold, damp units. I was a subject of one of those articles last year about bubble wrap on a window. When I moved into Haas Courts, I noticed that there was a power-hungry scope wall-mounted heater. My current power bill this month alone is $350 for a 2-bedroom uninsulated unit. If I wanted to get a heat pump, I would have to pay for the device, pay for it to be installed, and pay for it to be removed after my tenancy ended. I cannot afford that. How is this possible for low-income tenants to afford this? When they've gone to Ministry of Social Development, they've turned back and said to them, it is the landowner's responsibility. I am sure you, the council, will ask, how are you going to insulate the approximate 43% of your housing stock without costing ratepayers too much? People have asked for cycle lanes to be put on hold. They've asked for artworks to be put on hold so this can be done. It also has been announced on the website, Council City website, that they're giving a loan to Otatahi of $30 million to build an additional 130 social housing units for Christchurch City, as well as replace 50 existing old and cold units with 50 new warm and dry units. This is a small step, but it's definitely not enough. Now, Pink Bats is an insulation. They do mid-floor, scallion roofs, floors, roofs, and of course walls. But Mitre 10, Placemakers and Bunnings have other things available. If you think we should continue to live like this, when both local and central government are pushing for healthier homes, maybe we as tenants should ask you, are you willing to live in these units? Because I believe you're not. So, what will you guys do? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tim, Yanni and Glenn.
Hello again.
Hi.
Do you know what year these your particular building?
Haas Court was built in 1970s.
1970s.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yanni, is it? Yep.
Obviously, you're a tenant of the Otatahi Community Housing Trust.
I'm also a grandparent tenant from the council.
Right, so you've had both experiences with council and the housing trust.
Correct.
And just wanted to check in terms of when you put requests in for things to happen, how effective has that been?
The only thing that has happened to my unit, other than general maintenance, is bubble wrap on the window. And last year, I almost ended up in hospital due to a severe chest infection. I had to take 2 weeks off of work. I didn't get paid for 1 week. I found it quite hard for day-to-day living. I've got a question for you guys. Do you know what the minimum policy?
Can I just ask the councillors to finish asking questions first? You can end with an open question. Tim, are you carrying?
Yeah, just one more.
Well, no, we've got Glenn, so Glenn and then Tim.
Thank you, Stephen. Could you tell us the temperature range or what you think it is in your units?
In summertime, I have to have the heater on. I wake up to a cold, damp bed in summer. Living temperature is about 8 degrees.
8.
In winter, it sits around 0.
Okay. World Health Guidelines 18.
I know.
Thank you, at least.
Tim.
Would your preference be that we put a hold on new builds and get the old stock right?
I would like to see an improvement, even if it's a temporary improvement to the old stock, to get so you can get new stock in. The minimum code for insulation for ceiling is 3.3 for this region. Yeah. For walls, it's 2.4, and flooring 1.3 nationwide. Any insulation is a huge improvement. Even double glazing on windows would be a massive improvement, even if it's temporarily.
But if we have a budget of an amount, because we've also got to be prudent with our rates.
Yeah.
So if there's a certain amount, and we have people like yourselves and many others living in substandard buildings, which technically are illegal.
Yes.
What would your preference be?
My preference, to be honest, is to look after the most vulnerable first, stick them in nice, clean, brand new units where they get plenty of sun and nice warm, so they're not freezing or spending too much money on power. As far as I'm aware, I, myself and a few other tenants haven't received any written confirmation on whether our units can be insulated or not.
Thank you.
Okay, so I mean that's something we can certainly, because this is not, I mean the legal environment is actually quite different from the way that you've expressed it. it's the legal environment is that we are obliged to be compliant with the regulations by a particular date, which is not now. So, but it's a very good point that you raise, and it will be very helpful for when we come to the consideration of the paper later on in the agenda. I think we may have a couple of other recommendations to consider, not just in the light of what you've said, but in the light of rethinking things. But I am concerned if you say that as a tenant you have not received advice as to the reasons why it is challenging, because there are many of our units that can't be insulated to the standards, and we need to make sure that we go through a really careful process to make sure that our tenants can, well, the Otautahi Community Housing Trust tenants can be housed, because the last thing that we want to do is to shut down any options in the meantime while we work out a strategic approach to getting the rebuilds and the insulation that can be done. So I think that one of the things that we might need to look at today is whether we can get an update out to tenants through Otautahi Community Housing Trust as to the status of the units that they're in, and give people a reasonable assessment of when decisions will be made.
A lot of tenants would like more information coming to them, because at the moment we're getting very little information and it's driving us crazy.
And that's what I was kind of trying to understand. So that would be really good.
Yeah.
And I think council, if we own the units, we could directly communicate around the insulation. We don't need to wait for the trust to do that.
Yeah, I think though that we want to. The relationships have been built with the trust, though, haven't they? I mean, you've got a relationship person.
I do have a tenancy manager.
Yeah.
But I'm also a grandparent tenant from the council days.
Yeah.
I found
all that means is that we don't get the income-related rental subsidy for you.
I know. I found it was easier to deal with my tenancy manager from the council than it is from Otautahi. It's just been...
I think that's because there are two separate issues, and I think one of the things that I think we've been thinking about as a council is whether we can better integrate the rebuild and the large maintenance program with Otautahi Community Housing Trust, because at the moment they're not legally responsible for the big stuff like you're talking about, but they are responsible for the day-to-day sort of maintenance.
This is why I've come to you, because...
Yes, and so I think that, and quite rightly so, I think that what we want to be looking at this afternoon when we get to the paper, we want to really look at how we can merge the two programs of work so that we're not thinking of the little stuff being with the trust and the big stuff being with us, but actually think of it as an integrated whole system that actually serves the needs of the community. And I'm thinking immediately that one of an early one would be to give you a heat pump, because it must be good for everyone if we can do that. And that might be something that can be looked at in terms of some of the units, because it would be cheaper to put in a heat pump than to leave people in the conditions where they're essentially being transferred the cost of high power.
The tenants just want more information when you've organised something, can go from there. Because we just feel left in the dark at the moment.
I think a combined communication would be quite helpful at this point. So look, thank you very much for coming. It's much appreciated. It's good to see people taking the opportunity to appear in front of the council and making a passionate plea on behalf of the people that live in social housing in Christchurch. It's really important. Thank you. Right, so if we could now break for morning tea. It is just after 11 o'clock, and if we be back here, say by